Melochim Perigimel Halacha Aleph Perigimel. And the Rambam says, "Yeshev HaMelech HaKisei Malchusai." For the time that the king sits on his royal throne, he has to write in the Sefer Torah for himself. Yoser, this is more so than the Al Sefer Shenichel Yavoisov, than the Sefer which his fathers left him. Let's see what the Peirush says below. He writes the Sefer Torah for himself, for his name, more so than the Sefer. Yes, more so than the Sefer that his fathers left him, because every king left a Sefer. He's the son of a king. And he makes sure it's correct. Sefer HaZorah. According to the Sefer that's found in the Azorah, there was one Sefer Torah found next to the Oren, Al-Pi Bezdin Shel Shiurim Ve'echad, and this is according to the Sanhedrin of 71. What does it mean Sefer HaZorah? Rashi explains in Vavasa 14b. A Sefer that was Moshe Rabbeinu wrote, and the king read in it, B'Hakel. According to Godol Yom Kippurim in the HaZorah. Therefore it's called Sefer HaZorah. That's what Rashi says. However, Rashi explains that was Sefer Mugah, that was in the Azorah, and from that you verified that all the other Sefer Torah were correct. There weren't any mistakes. And those have a text, Sefer Ezra. It was from Ezra, the Sefer, when he came out from Babel. But that's not correct, because we're talking about the first Beis HaMikdash, and then there were kings, and then the second Beis HaMikdash there weren't kings. Ezra Sefer was at the beginning of the second temple, Beis HaMikdash, and the second Beis HaMikdash, at the beginning till the Hashmonaim, there were no kings over Israel. Because the Mishnah Halacha Mishnah Side Yerushalmi, Sanhedrin Perek Beis Halacha Vav. In Hilchos Sefer Torah, because the Mishnah questions, how does Rambam know this thing? The Mishnah points out that the Kesef Mishnah himself said here was Yerushalmi. Of Sefer, what happens if his forefathers didn't leave him a Sefer, or was lost? He has to write two of them. King has to have two of them. One is his own, just like every person has a mitzvah to write a Sefer Torah, and he leaves it in his treasure houses. He's no different than any other Jew that has to write a Sefer Torah, although there's no time frame when. The other one has to be with him continuously. Just that when he goes into an area where he's not allowed to have it, such as a bathroom, or a bathhouse, or a place where you're not allowed to read the Torah, he has to take it out and remove it. But when he's found in a place that you can read it, he has to have it. Therefore, when he goes out to war, the Sefer Torah is with him. Nichnas, the Rambam says, he comes back from the war, it's with him. Bedin, if he's sitting on judgment on the people, it's with him. Meisave, he eats his food, he doesn't say it's with him, he says it's Kenegdoi. Shanema, as it says, he should write on the Mishnah Torah on a Sefer voice, it shall be with him, boy. He should read in it, Kol Yemei Chai, of all the days of his life. The Kesef Mishnah cites a Mishnah in Sanhedrin 21 Aleph, and it says, Kosev Lo Sefer Torah. It says he has to write a Sefer Torah that tells you for him specifically. Brisa we learned, but he should not say it's enough that I have for my forefathers, but he has to write one for himself. Amarova. Rabbi says, somebody whose fathers left him a Sefer Torah, has a mitzvah to write a Sefer Torah of his own, because it says in the Dvorim, Ato, and you, this is for all of Klal Yisrael, write this shiur, and Abaya infers from that brisa that only a king has a mitzvah to write for himself a Sefer Torah. He shouldn't be happy with that which he received from his predecessors, but an individual, it's enough to Sefer Torah that his fathers left him. So he keeps that mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah. Whoever disagrees, he explains the Brisa. There's a mitzvah for the king. He has to have two Sefer Torah. Shenema, as it says, because the Elohim Mishnah Torah Azois, it says he shall write for himself this Mishnah Torah. Mishnah means two Sefer Torah. It's a mitzvah specifically for a king, and he cites the Mishnah Sanhedrin 21b. He learned from the Kohen, he reads from it all his life, any moment that he's alive. Therefore, he goes out and comes back, the Sefer Torah is with him, so he should be able to read it all the time. One that's in his treasury house, like every other Jew. If he inherited the Sefer Torah that's in the treasury house, that he does not have to write another one. So the maximum he has to write is two, but the minimum he might get by writing one when he's king. After he sits, as the Rambam says, after he sits on the throne. The Brisa adds, if you go out and he goes with him, he makes it small like a kameah, and he puts it on his right hand. Now, that should be with him always, as it says, God is, the name of God is always before me. Because it continues, for my right hand it shall not be removed. It doesn't go with him into the bathhouse or the toilet, as it says. It will be with it, and he should read it only in a place where he can read it. Because the Mishnah points out that the Rambam does not say he should make it small and place it on his hand. Lecha Mishnah explains, the intent of the Brisa is not that he should make it as small as a kamiyah and hang it on his forearm, because in the Mishnah writes he should goes out to the war, he takes it with him. He sits in the judgment, it's with him, and since it's hanging on his shoulder, it's with him. So why does he have to say that? And so the extra language comes to teach us, doesn't mean that's small. It means that if he sits, when he goes out, he has it with him. Therefore, it's considered like a kameah, which most people carry all the time. Therefore, the Rambam does not mention this. As the Mishnah refers from the language of the Rambam, when the king sits on his throne, he writes a Sefer Torah for himself. Only a king, his father left him a Sefer Torah, it's enough that he should write only one Sefer. Questions from Sanhedrin. Going to Rebbe, and a private person whose father left him a Sefer Torah, he's obligated to write another Sefer, as it says in the commandments in Voron. Even if he had one, and it would seem that a king should have to write two, one for himself, even though his father left him one. He should have to write one for his private personage, and the other one for his kingly personage. So he says you can answer. The Rambam explains the intent of the Gemara that he should not make himself happy with that of others. There's a separate law regarding the king. Only a Sefer Torah. The second one he has to write it. In addition to that of a private person, he shouldn't rely on his fathers. But the Sefer Torah, every individual has to write that the king can rely on what he received from his father. The private person, if he rely on what the Sefer Torah that his father left him, he'll find he won't write a Sefer Torah ever. The king who relies on his father, since he has to write another one, therefore he can fulfill his obligation of the first one from that which he received from his father, not the second one. Stop. We have to advance questions. Why now I'm saying in the beginning of the Halacha, Hilchos Melochim, among the 23 mitzvahs that a king is obligated to write a Sefer Torah. And Sefer HaMitzvahs, he did count it as a mitzvah. It's two mitzvahs. One, that the king has to write a special one for himself. Two, everyone from Yisrael has to write a Sefer Torah. And he answers that the writing of a Sefer Torah is mentioned here just as a side of the obligations of the king. The main place is by the mitzvahs I say, by Tefillah Mezuzah and Sefer Torah. One is that every person has to write a Sefer Torah, and the other one is that a king has to write a second Sefer Torah. Therefore, he did not mention it here. In Hilchos Tefillin, and Rambam doesn't repeat himself. That's why he writes it only one place. Hilchos Tefillin mezuzah v'Sefer Torah. The Rambam writes, it's a mitzvah, it's a positive commandment on every person to write a Sefer Torah for himself. It says in Dvorim, now you shall all write this shiur, this Torah. And write a Torah that has this shiur, which is Parshas Ha'azino, where the commandment is given. And since that we don't write a Torah in portions, therefore you can't just write Ha'azino, therefore you have to write the whole thing. He continues that on the king, he has to write a Sefer Torah, one for his name, as king, in addition to that which he had as a private individual. There are times that the Melech already wrote one in his name. And we said before, especially according to what we said before, that for the private one he can use his forefathers, so maybe he'll say this one will be for me. The answer is no, he can't. And when he will be on the seat of his kingdom, he will write it. We learn that he's obligated to write a Sefer Torah more so than what he had before. And he doesn't bring the posuk because he already explained it in Hilchos Sefer Torah. We're going Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and Hilchos Sefer Torah writes of the language of the Rambam, and you check it from the Sefer of Azor or from Ezra with the Sanhedrin. He points out that the Maimonides writes, you learn from what it says he should write this second Torah on Al Sefer B'nei Kehanim Alavim, which says on a Sefer before the Kehanim and the Levim, that the king has to read it, has to write it before them. And it means the same, the Sefer that's in the Azor. That's what it's referring to. The Sefer says, Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Torah, and he gave it to the Kehanim and the Levi, who carried the arm with Hashem, and also to all Ziknei Yisrael. He writes it according to Bezdin, as it says, Ve'al kol Ziknei Yisrael. According to Rabbi Akiva Eiger, the text that's correct is, and he edits it, or proofreads it from the Sefer Nazorah. That means the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote, because in the last day of his life he wrote 13 Sefer Torahs. Hilchos Sefer Torah, the Rambam continues. It doesn't matter whether the king wrote his Sefer, or the Sefer was written after the king became king by someone else. It has to be with him. In other words, he doesn't have to technically write it. What was written after he's king for him by someone else. Does that mean he has to give the money? Or does that mean just you can have a Sefer write it? Because it says, V'oisei imoy. The main obligation should be with him, and he should read it all his life. Halacha Gimel says, if he didn't have a Sefer Torah before he was king, he has to write 2 Sefer Torah, Sefer Torah. One after he was king, and he can't write the second one first and then write the other one, because it says this is the second Torah. The one that goes with him has to be the second one. The second one of the 2 Sefer Torah. And if he has a Sefer Torah that he wrote before he was king, it's enough he should write a second Torah after he's established as king, crowned. And he adds that the Sefer that he wrote as king should only be taken away from him at night, or when he goes to the bathhouse or to the toilet. Over there he does write at night, not over here, or to sleep on his bed. It's not mentioned that the Sefer Torah shouldn't be with him at night. In Perek Gimel, it says the Melech is forbidden to drink to drunkenness, but he has to learn Torah and deal with the needs of Yisrael both day and night. As it says, the Torah shall be with him, and he should read it all his life. Therefore, he has to read in the Sefer that he wrote while he's king all his days, and even at night. Like we find that Azariah says, and the obligation of remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt at night, that Kol Yemei Chayecho, when it says Kol Yemei Chayecho, by him it says Kol Yemei Chayecho, all the days means the nights. and he wants to add, Sefer Torah, that it cannot. How does the Rambam write at night? He can put it away. It must be even when he's not sleeping, because he writes that separately when he goes to sleep. Slach refers that the Rambam is not the opinion of Elazar Nazaria that Kol Yemei Chayecho means the night, and therefore the Sefer Torah is not obligated to be with him at night. Now there's a question on the Slach from Perek Gimel. It says in Perek Gimel in Halacha Hey, you should be oisik in the Torah and the needs of Klal Yisrael by the Maimonides, because it says Kol Yemei Chayev. Sefer Alikutim is brought down that the Mekubolim wrote that you shouldn't read a Torah, the written Torah at night. This is where it comes up the question of saying Tehillim at night, except in dire extremities. That's why some people don't do that the first half of the night. And therefore, the Rambam says that at night the king puts away the Sefer Torah. But the Medrash, you see that Kodesh Baruch Hu wanted the Yeshua should be oisik in Sefer Torah even by day and by night when the Malach came to him. And the Godol cites that the Yeshua was a Sefer Torah, which every king had. Because as we learned earlier, Perek Aleph Halacha Gimel, Yeshua had a din of a king. Therefore, he has to learn it by night as well. Not like the Rambam here seems to be stating. So Hilchos Yesodei says you have to change the text at night when he goes to sleep on his bed. And it shouldn't be two separate categories. The Maram Shik is questions an individual that has two Sefer Torahs becomes king. Is that good enough? He says according. He says that before the king began to reign, he's not obligated. So you can't fulfill an obligation when you're not obligated. Individual has a mitzvah. He wrote two Sefer Torahs. No obligation, but if he did so, it's a private Sefer Torah, not the one that he has to write when he's a king. The Emek Brocha infers from the language when the king sits on his royal throne. That's when he has to write it, as it says in the Pasuk in Torah 17:18. When he sits on his throne and he writes the Mishnah Torah, he's obligated to write the Torah only after it was the kingdom was given to him, in order to read from it all continuously. So his heart should not go up from his brothers, and so he should not do the wrong things while he is king. Somebody who was just anointed the kingdom, even though he's a king, he's not chayav mitzvahs writing the Sefer Torah until he sits on the throne. The editor writes that is proof from here that Shaul didn't know that David was king. That proves that David wasn't walking around with the Sefer Torah before. That if he would have, then Shaul would have realized he's king. He has to write a Torah lishmoi. That's who we find in the Sefer Torah for himself. The Chazon Yechezkel, Ramsky Zatzal, infers that he's obligated to write specifically for himself. Maybe therefore the Rambam doubled the language for himself and for himself. That he has to write the Sefer for himself when he is king. Machon Nesher is of the opinion that he doesn't have to have the Sefer, that a Sefer should write the Sefer Shel Melech as an agent. It's enough for him to write it, to give it to the king. So the Machon Nesher would seem to be saying that Shlomo HaMelech could have had the Sefer Torah because it was written for a king, although he was a Kohen. That's only the Machon Nesher, not everybody else. The Pri Adoma writes, no Sefer Torah, that when you write a Sefer Torah of an individual, the one who rectifies even one letter is as if he wrote the entire Sefer Torah. When Shmuel adds that the shul would apply by a king. It could mean that a king who fixed one letter is called as if he wrote the whole thing, and therefore he fulfilled the obligation to be as king. That would answer the short period of time. That would just have passed one letter, and he would add the letter. It would become a Sefer Torah. Pri Adoma cites from the Lashon of the Rambam Chol, anyone who edits a Sefer Torah in one letter, as if he wrote it in its entirety, adds a chol, and not only he who edits it. To say that a king who edited even one letter, it would be considered his. But the Pri Adoma negates the proof. The Rambam says afterwards that every person has to write a Sefer Torah before he mentions that a king has to write a Sefer Torah, a second one. From here it would seem that we're talking about just an individual, a private individual, but a king has to write a new Sefer Torah. It's not enough that he should fix one letter. We can learn this all from what it says. He writes a Sefer Torah for himself as king. And in Peirush HaMeir, in Sanhedrin Perek Beis Mishnah Vov, the Rambam explains he writes two Sefer Torah that are complete. So there he adds, only when it's complete is it considered a Sefer Torah. The Minchas Chinuch infers from the Tosefta that a melech who buys a Sefer Torah wasn't written for his name, he did not fulfill his obligation. And he emphasizes that even though the Rambam writes two Sefer Torahs, it could be he can write one Sefer Torah like everyone else by buying one, but the one that he's obligated to write, he does not fulfill by buying. It has to be written. The Melochim seems to agree with that, although the Melochim says somebody else can give it to him. So then how would Shlomo again fulfill his obligation? The Maimonides David discusses whether the king is obligated to write a sefer that everybody is of Yisrael is obligated, and then he can write a sefer Torah for himself like a king, because it says he should write the second one. Or what happens if he wrote the second one first? And he says that the Rambam writes in the specifics of the mitzvah, the king should write a second Sefer Torah. Means that it seems that the obligation should be the second one. The Peirush HaMeir, he says that you write two of them. One should be with him always, and the other one he calls the one that stays in the treasure house the second one. Thus, he calls the second one the one that he's written. So maybe it doesn't have to be in that order. The Tziyuni Maran brings in the name of the Ran that he infers, and it's with him, means that somebody else carries it for him. And when the king goes into the toilet, certainly doesn't take his Sefer Torah with him, even if you could do so in a permissible manner, where it's in a vessel within a vessel, since a Torah is not a proper place to bring a Sefer Torah, even for a king to read there. He can't read the Melochim emphasize that all the laws of the king that are mentioned here, even a king from the other tribes, as we have in Perek Aleph, even a king from the 10 tribes was obligated to have a Sefer Torah. But Shuvas Meishet Dvorim brings a proof from a Mishnah in Sanhedrin 21b. He judges, and it's with him. The obligation of a Sefer Torah is only to a king of Maal's Beis David that judges, and you judge him. But the kings of Israel, since they were not judges, they cannot have the obligation of judge, and therefore there's no obligation to have the Sefer Torah with them. You show your Sefer, Saïd Rabbeinu Yoina, that he sits in judgment and it's with him. We're talking about by Maimonides, that's possible with Malchus Yisrael, and they are obligated to write a Sefer Torah. Who reads on the Sefer Torah with the king? The Lechem Mishnah Chodesh, I'm sure why the Rambam doesn't bring the law Halacha, which is brought in the Tosefta, that no one else can read in it. Not he shall read in it, not a Hedid. The Pri Adoma questions, since the Tosefta obligates you that a private person is forbidden to read in it, the Rambam should have mentioned it. And since the Lashon Rambam, it says he writes it for himself, seems that the king himself would be forbidden, a different king would be forbidden to read in it. And if the forbiddenness is because you can't use the vessels of the king, another melech would have been able to read from it. And since it doesn't say that, it would seem another king would be forbidden to read in it as well.